There is a story about Carl Jung that most people get wrong. A woman once came to him completely broken by betrayal. She kept saying the same words over and over again. "I do not understand how they could do this to me." She was not crying because someone had lied to her. She was crying because the person she had imagined in her head never actually existed in real life. And Jung noticed something deeply troubling. The pain was not coming from reality itself. It was coming from the collapse of a fantasy she had built inside her own mind. Because deep down, the human mind does something very dangerous with people it admires, loves, fears, or desires. It fills in the empty spaces. You meet someone confident, and your mind automatically assumes they must be loyal. You meet someone attractive, and your mind automatically assumes they must also be kind. You meet someone who understands you on an emotional level just once, and suddenly you begin constructing an entire personality around them that was never truly there to begin with. Most people are not really in relationships with other people. They are in relationships with the projections they have created inside their heads. And eventually reality shows up like a sharp knife. Not loudly, not dramatically. Quietly. In delayed replies. In disrespect that hides behind jokes. In sudden coldness after you stop being useful to someone. In that strange, hollow feeling that a person only values you when you are emotionally available and giving to them. You have probably experienced this before without fully admitting it to yourself. That moment when you slowly begin to realize that the version of someone living inside your head feels warmer and more real than the actual person standing right in front of you. That realization changes something in you permanently, because once you see it clearly, you begin noticing how often people perform different versions of themselves depending on who they are around. The loyal friend you know becomes a completely different person when they are in another room with different people. The nice and gentle person suddenly turns harsh and cruel the moment they gain some social power. The person who always talked about how much they loved honesty becomes deeply defensive the very moment you speak honestly to them. And the most unsettling part is this. Most people are not consciously pretending or putting on a show. They genuinely believe that the mask they perform every day is their real self. Carl Jung believed that every single human being carries what he called a shadow. This is the hidden part of themselves that they absolutely refuse to look at or acknowledge. And the more a person avoids facing that shadow, the more hollow and artificial their personality slowly becomes over time. That is why some people start to feel strangely empty once you know them long enough. Because eventually the performance begins to break down. The mask slips. And for just one brief moment, you catch a glimpse of what is really underneath. The deep insecurity hiding beneath all that charm. The quiet envy sitting underneath all that support. The need for control hiding underneath all that affection. People do not fear being seen. They fear being seen completely and fully. And maybe that is exactly why the moment you stop romanticizing people feels so deeply uncomfortable. Because you suddenly realize how much of your own suffering came from loving illusions that your own mind carefully created for them without their help. After that kind of realization, something subtle but powerful begins shifting inside you. You stop only listening to what people say with their words. You begin studying the patterns in their behavior, and patterns reveal things that people spend their entire lives carefully trying to hide from the world and from themselves. You start noticing how some people only become warm and affectionate when they sense that you are pulling away from them. How respect suddenly appears after you have created some distance. How attention increases the very moment you stop chasing after it. It becomes impossible not to see these things once your eyes are open. Human behavior is deeply reactive at its core. Most people do not truly value what is consistently present in their lives. They value what feels difficult to hold on to and secure. That is precisely why kindness is so often ignored and taken for granted until it disappears completely. Kindness that exists without any boundaries quietly teaches people around you exactly how to use you without guilt or consequence. And the frightening part is how early this kind of conditioning actually begins in a person's life. In school, you probably witnessed it without fully understanding what you were seeing at the time. The quieter student becoming the target of everyone simply because they tolerated disrespect without pushing back. The confident person receiving admiration and praise despite treating others around them poorly. The one who constantly gave up everything for everyone, slowly fading into the background and becoming invisible. As if human beings unconsciously organize themselves around power and social strength long before any real understanding of morality ever enters the picture. Carl Jung believed that whatever people reject and deny inside themselves eventually gets projected outward onto other people. And once you truly understand projection, social life becomes a psychologically disturbing thing to observe. The deeply insecure person accuses others of desperately seeking attention. The dishonest person becomes obsessed with talking about loyalty. The controlling person calls themselves a protector. The people who are most terrified of being abandoned very often become the ones who emotionally suffocate the people closest to them. Everyone reveals who they truly are eventually. Not through confession or honest conversation, through repetition of behavior over time. That is why awareness changes your relationships in ways that can never be undone. You stop judging isolated moments and incidents and instead begin observing consistent behavior across long stretches of time. And consistency always exposes reality in the end. The friend who only reaches out to you during their own emotional crisis. The person who subtly turns every single conversation into a quiet competition with you. The relationship where your vulnerability and openness somehow always seem to become ammunition used against you later. At first, these realizations are painful because your mind desperately wants to defend the people you care about, especially the ones you have invested deep emotions into over time. So you find ways to rationalize and explain everything away. They are just going through a stressful period. They did not really mean it that way. That is simply how they have always been. But eventually a darker and more honest thought begins to enter your mind. What if you have been translating disrespect into simple misunderstanding all along, simply because you were too afraid of losing those people? That single question has the power to change everything. Because many relationships survive not through genuine love and mutual respect, but through denial. Denial is what keeps many families appearing to function normally. Denial is what keeps toxic friendships alive and breathing for years without end. Denial is what keeps people emotionally attached and tied to those who have already quietly stopped valuing them a long time ago. Most relationships do not fall apart the moment respect disappears. They fall apart when awareness finally appears. And awareness naturally creates distance. Not always a physical distance, a psychological one. You begin feeling strangely detached in conversations that once felt deeply important to you. Certain compliments start sounding hollow and transactional rather than genuine. Certain acts of affection begin feeling calculated and strategic rather than warm and sincere. You stop being hypnotized and charmed so easily. And once that happens, the social dynamics playing out around you become impossible to ignore or unsee. You notice how groups of people silently and collectively punish authenticity. How people become visibly uncomfortable when someone refuses to perform the expected role. how honesty and straightforwardness can threaten entire social structures that were carefully built on polite and comfortable deception. Because most social systems are not actually built on truth. They are built on a mutual agreement. An agreement between everyone involved to avoid saying out loud what everyone already privately knows and sees. And the person who breaks that shared illusion first almost always ends up becoming labeled as the problem by everyone else. That is the strange and quiet punishment that comes with being able to see reality clearly. You become far harder to manipulate. But you also become harder to fit in anywhere comfortably. Because once you stop romanticizing people and situations, you begin realizing just how much of ordinary social life depends on performance and carefully managed appearances. Watch how people shift and change depending on social status. The insecure become excessively agreeable and eager around anyone with authority. The confident ones suddenly become dismissive and cold around anyone they perceive as weak. Even a person's sense of morality shifts depending on what social reward is available to them. Someone will loudly and publicly condemn betrayal while quietly and privately betraying people in their own life. Someone will preach about the importance of honesty while carefully and deliberately constructing an image designed entirely to control how others perceive them. And what is most disturbing of all is that many people do not even realize they are doing any of this. Carl Jung understood something truly brutal about human nature. The ego will go to almost any length to protect its own self-image. People want and need to believe that they are good at their core. So instead of honestly confronting their own darkness, they create elaborate explanations that reframe it entirely. Cruelty becomes honesty. Manipulation becomes an act of love. Control becomes protection. Jealousy becomes genuine concern. The human mind is frighteningly skilled at disguising its true motives from the world and from itself. That is why some of the most genuinely dangerous people you will ever encounter are not the openly cruel or openly malicious ones. They are the ones who are completely and utterly convinced of their own innocence at every moment. And if you have lived long enough, you have almost certainly encountered this kind of person before. The friend who constantly tears you down, but always frames it as being honest for your own good. The partner who makes you feel deeply guilty every time you need a little personal space. The person who creates emotional chaos and disorder and then acts genuinely wounded and hurt when you react to what they have created. These people steadily drain your energy while maintaining a perfect image of themselves as the victim in every situation. Because victimhood itself can become a very powerful tool in the right hands. The moment you fully understand this dynamic, your perception of human interaction changes in a way that cannot be reversed. You stop focusing only on what people say to you. You begin asking a different and more revealing question. What emotional outcome is this person actually trying to get from me right now? That one question reveals almost everything you need to know. Some people want your admiration and constant validation. Some want your obedience and compliance. Some want you to become emotionally dependent on them so they always feel needed. Some simply want someone they can quietly position beneath them so that they can temporarily escape their own crushing feelings of inadequacy and smallness. People rarely seek genuine connection as purely as they claim to. More often, what they are truly seeking is regulation, a way to soothe and quiet the emptiness inside that they cannot face when they are alone with themselves. And this is the point at which the illusion of romance also begins to collapse completely. Because many relationships are not truly built on love in any deep or lasting sense. They are built on unconscious psychological contracts that neither person ever clearly agreed to or even fully recognized. I will make you feel valuable and worthy if you make me feel desired and wanted. I will rescue and save you as long as you promise never to leave me. I will admire and praise you as long as you protect me from my loneliness. This is precisely why people change so suddenly and so completely once the emotional transaction stops benefiting them in the way it once did. Not because they became an entirely different person overnight, because the mask was attached to a condition, and conditions eventually expose themselves. You can see this most clearly after success, failure, or transformation. Become successful and hidden envy appears. Become vulnerable and hidden disrespect comes to the surface. Set boundaries and hidden entitlement reveals itself. Nothing exposes human nature faster than changing the role people assign to you. The quiet person becomes confident. The agreeable person starts saying no. The insecure person begins healing. Suddenly, the people who claim to love them start feeling uncomfortable. Why? Because some relationships were unconsciously built around your weakness. People do not always love who you are becoming. Sometimes they love who you used to be when you were easier to manage. And that realization does not make you hate humanity. It simply removes the illusion. Once the illusion disappears, loneliness starts feeling different. Not heavier, but sharper. You begin realizing that being surrounded by people and being truly understood are completely different experiences. Some of the loneliest people have active phones, crowded rooms, relationships, conversations every single day. But nobody around them genuinely sees them beyond utility, identity, or expectation. And maybe you felt this before without knowing how to describe it. That strange exhaustion after socializing. The feeling that you were present physically, but absent psychologically. Like you spent hours performing a version of yourself that kept everyone comfortable, while the real you remained hidden underneath. Carl Jung believed that the greatest burden a child must carry is the unlived life of the parents. But the same pattern continues everywhere in adulthood too. Society rewards masks early. Be agreeable, be attractive, be successful, be useful, be emotionally digestible. Slowly, people stop asking themselves who they truly are and begin asking a more dangerous question. What version of me gets accepted the fastest? And once a person builds their identity around acceptance, authenticity starts feeling like a threat. That is why genuinely self-aware people often make others uncomfortable without even trying. Their presence exposes performance. A person who no longer desperately seeks validation becomes difficult to control. A person comfortable with solitude becomes difficult to manipulate. A person who sees through emotional games stops feeding them. And people notice this immediately, even if nobody says it out loud. There is a reason some individuals lose friends after becoming more confident, disciplined, or emotionally independent. Growth changes the social balance. The insecure friend suddenly feels inferior. The controlling partner loses their influence. The attention seeker no longer receives constant reassurance. And beneath all of this sits a disturbing truth most people avoid confronting. Many relationships are held together less by love and more by unconscious mutual dependency. One person needs admiration, the other needs purpose. One needs emotional rescue, the other needs to feel needed. It functions until one person evolves. Then suddenly the relationship begins cracking in places nobody expected, because awareness destroys unconscious agreements. This is why healing can feel socially dangerous. When you stop tolerating disrespect, manipulative people call you selfish. When you stop over-explaining yourself, insecure people call you distant. When you stop chasing approval, some people lose interest entirely. Not because you became worse, but because your role changed. And most human relationships are far more role-based than people want to admit. The funny friend, the strong one, the listener, the helper. The moment you stop performing your assigned role, people react as if you violated an invisible agreement, because in many cases, you did. The terrifying realization is that very few people actually want complete authenticity. Complete authenticity disrupts social comfort. Imagine if everyone openly admitted their jealousy, insecurity, need for validation, hidden resentment, fear of abandonment, desire for control. Most relationships would collapse under the weight of honesty.
So society survives through partial truth, carefully managed masks, polite performances, and mutual avoidance. And the person who begins seeing this clearly often goes through a strange psychological shift. They stop feeling shocked by human behavior because they finally understand it. And understanding human nature too deeply creates a dangerous temptation. Detachment. Not peaceful detachment, but cold detachment. The kind where you begin expecting manipulation before kindness, self-interest before loyalty, performance before sincerity. At first, it feels intelligent and protective. You tell yourself you have finally woken up, that you see people for what they truly are now. But this is where many people misunderstand Jung completely, because seeing the darkness in others is only half the journey. The real shift begins when you recognize the same darkness inside yourself. That moment usually arrives quietly. You catch yourself enjoying someone's failure, feeling secretly validated when another person becomes insecure around you, withholding affection to regain control, performing confidence while hiding fear, pretending not to care because caring feels dangerous. And suddenly the image of yourself as different starts collapsing too. That is the shadow Jung warned about, not evil, hidden humanity. The parts of yourself you separated from your identity because they felt unacceptable. Jealousy, neediness, ego, manipulation, cruel thoughts, the desire to dominate, the desire to be worshipped, the desire to be chosen over others.